Thank you for your patience while we got back in order.
No worries, my pleasure. In 2010, the State Board of Education passed a resolution that dealt with the selective disinformation and half-truths pertaining to content found in the textbooks that were pro-Islamic and anti-Christian. Included in this is a misleading description of the manner in which Islam spread. In Singage's sixth grade book, the original text was correct. Quote, "In the centuries after Muhammad's death, Muslims spread the religion through military conquest," unquote. Yet two organizations testified in September, convincing you and the publishers to change the wording to, quote, "Islam spread by conquest, missionary, work and trade," unquote. Facts about one of those groups who testified. This group, along with over 300 other Muslims and Islamic groups, were identified by the United States federal government as co-conspirators associated with the Holy Land Foundation, in which the leadership of the Holy Land Foundation was convicted of supporting terrorism in 2008. That person testifying in September is executive director of the Dallas chapter of CARE. While at the 2014 Muslim Capital Day, he said to a gathering of Muslims, quote, "Muslims are above the law," unquote. On Saturday, the country of United Arab Emirates designated the same organization, CARE, as a terrorist organization. We submitted testimony from a noted Islamic expert, Dr. Andrew Boston. Their written testimony has not been responded to by any publishers that I'm aware of. In fact, some of the very same references the SBOE used in their 2010 resolution are cited by these experts, confirming Islam was spread almost exclusively by the sword and or the threat of the sword. That is not the only distortion of how Islam is presented to our children. The glowing treatment of women in the Worldview book is defended by the editor with this comment, quote, "There is significant historical evidence that Muhammad improved the status of women under Islam. The historical evidence I use are the basic writings and the life of Muhammad, which is what every Muslim adheres to. In fact, the Quran says 91 times that to be a good Muslim, you follow the life of Muhammad precisely. Muhammad said a woman needs 4 witnesses, all male for legal case, to be made against the male rapist. Is that really, quote, improving the status of women, unquote? 71% of the over 12,000 words in the Quran put women in a, quote, low status as compared to men. In the Hadiths, the stories of Muhammad, the percentage is even higher. 93% of over 40,000 words place women in lesser positions than men. While some statements have been corrected about Islam, many have not been due to pressures from groups like CARE and other Islamic groups who are reluctant to have facts presented. The result will be 5 million children will not learn the facts about Islam, not even the facts that Islamic scholars agree on.
All right, I think you got every word in. Good job. Ms. Hardy.
Yeah, I was wondering on the spread of Islam, and you mentioned the Cengage book.
Yes.
Was that addressed in any of the other texts, and did they do that?
I believe it's 16 of the other textbooks use a reference to jihad, of which probably I think over half of those reference the spread of Islam exactly in the same terminology of missionary work, trade, and conquest. And never referring to the growth of Islam from the time of the first 13 years when it was only 150 followers. In the last 10 years, it was 100,000 followers. And over the next 100 years, it went from just occupying and where there were no Jews or Christians still living in that part of the world. Over the next 100 years, Islam went from Spain all the way to Western China. That didn't happen because they had a better PowerPoint briefing. That happened because they had conquest and military conquest. And we're not telling our children those facts. We need to be very specific about that. And that there's been, over 500 battles in the name of Islam that's been fought since the beginning of Islam to approximately shortly after the Barbary Wars. So that type of information is very, very important.
Well, I having taught world history and world geography, I know, especially in the world history book, how it was handled before by conquest is the way those books read. But you said that that
Cengage actually got the language changed when those people testified.
Yeah, but Cengage actually had it right. But you, what was the source of saying what Cengage had originally was correct? What was that source?
Their original text.
No, but what you said, the idea of spreading the religion by the sword is supported by what text?
Hadiths, the Quran. You have approximately about 40% of the trilogy of the Quran, the Hadiths, and the autobiography talk about jihad. Those are all things that are within the Scripture, not some talking head somewhere. This is what Muhammad or those who talked about Muhammad actually talked about and did. And the examples start from the time that Muhammad moved to Medina when he became much more violent, and those kind of things are not talked about at all. The killing of 800 Jews, the lopping off of their heads, there in Medina, sitting there with his bride of 12 years old, none of that's talked about. And the examples that we fail to recognize is that when people talk about why this is important to today, because when people talk about, oh, that's not Islam, that's not real, when Boko Haram kidnaps young girls, or when people's heads are being chopped off, those are all things that Muhammad did. We're into facts. It's just a fact. So it's easy for people to say this is what they're doing, not because of some radicalization. It's because they live 91 times in the Quran, as I said, you're told to live like Muhammad. Much like Christians are told to live like Jesus if you're a Christian. At the same time, a convert or a believer in Islam, to be a full convert believer, you're following the life of Muhammad. So there's just now, does everybody do that? No. I've got great friends who are Muslims. I love them. And this isn't about, Muslims or hating Muslims. The greatest abuser of Muslims are other Muslims. And we as Americans want to defend children, want to defend women and any religion from being abused by their own religion and our own. But we have to be able to talk about it. It's words on a piece of paper. And to be afraid of doing that is, to me, criminal. And we're not telling our children, and we're not telling ourselves the truth. Because there's not going to be a teacher out there who's going to highlight that in a review, I can tell you.
Well, clarify something for me, though. When they talk about, like in the Cengage book, they said it was spread by the sword.
Right.
And like I said, the older history books will all say it is spread by the sword. I understand that it is a part of their dogma, their worldview, to spread it by the sword. But I think in your talk you gave another reference to the fact that why Cengage was correct. I understand what you're saying. It is correct, but what is the source for you saying that they were correct in that?
The Quran?
Well, no, I'm talking not about that. I'm talking about the specifics, because the Quran says you spread it by, but the fact is you could spread it by trade too, even though the Quran said it.
And there are always lots of reasons, a whole litany of them. But to give them equal status or to even mention them when, the growth of Islam did not occur initially and even significantly at any period of time of trade. I mean, trading is also, when they would come in, they don't use the word attack or kill, or they use the word conquest. That sounds much, or they're invited into a community. Well, if you're invited because someone's got a gun or a sword to your head, that's not really an invitation that most people can kind of turn down. So that's just not happened. Was there maybe some trader who said, if I don't become a Muslim, I'm not going to sell anything? Yeah, okay, maybe so. But let's talk about the detail, not the details, but the broader picture of what's happening at least in the spread of Islam. So it's really important for us to be factually accurate, and the number of battles, other kinds of information. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, but I was going to say, in my travels, there are places, for example, Kenya, where there's a large Muslim population, and there weren't necessarily battles that brought that to that region, or Indonesia or Bali or something like that, where those were truly as a part of, I never knew that was a missionary movement. All I knew it as a fact that those people came as settlers to trade, and then therefore that's how those religions, that religion showed up in those other areas.
But again, at the early days, it wasn't in Bali. It was there in the Middle East. And what we're talking about.
It was very early.
Absolutely. Okay. And I will point, and I'm not an expert completely about spitting out all the terrorist names, but in Malaysia, Philippines, there are many terrorist groups that are working there under the Islamic umbrella of some multi-syllable name, but they are representing and threatening to the groups that are
today, currently.
Oh, absolutely. So,
but I understand now what you were saying. You were saying historically.
Oh, yes.
And that's what the Cengage had tried to say. Historically, it was.
But it's
by the
happening.
sword.
It's happening today. I mean, we can't just say that was something that happened in the past. It's happening in Iraq, ISIS, and many other places. So, not knowing your history, because people get up on TV or talk amongst themselves and say, well, that's not Islam. Those folks, it may not be Islam to a practicing Muslim that I'm a friend with, because he doesn't want to hurt me, and that's okay, that's great, and I want him to be able to practice his peaceful religion. But the political side of Islam, the part that threatens you and me, when 60% of the operational manuals that a Muslim goes by, which is the Quran and the trilogy, the Hadiths and the biography, when that is talking about you and me, that's not a religion, that's a political system. And we need to be able to define that and talk about it and not fear of being labeled as one thing or another.
It's Ms. Hardy, you have another question?
I'm just kind of confused as to how this is stated in the textbooks. I'll go back and look at that. I understand what you're saying, and I was just trying to get a clarification.
And we'll be happy to give you a summary of every incident. We've got it searched that we can, cut and paste and send it to you. Be happy to. And we also had experts who came in. I made the comment about. We had Dr. Andrew Boston, who's written several books on the issue of jihad, a renowned expert, and using many of the source documents. We put his quote along with Daniel Akbari, who's a Sharia-trained lawyer. We put those and sent those out to every single publisher, and it was as if that went to a black hole somewhere.
Well, now, the publishers, whenever you ask about the jihad, and I know there was this controversy that jihad, they wanted it to be softened and say it was a personal struggle. But the publishers, even if they started with that, they did end up saying, I hope that it was a reflection on, in a struggle, meaning like intifada or overthrow.
I will let the next speaker talk about that.
Okay.
So I had a question. I remember in 6th grade in Pearson, and Ms. Hardy, this affects you too, that they were not going to change the definition of jihad. Have you seen any change of that? They just had the definition as struggle.
Yeah, and again, struggle. Yeah, and again, not to take the fire from Dr. Amy Jo Baker, but she'll be talking about that. But yes, in fact, we have not had anybody. We've had actually responses saying we're going to keep both definitions in there because they're equal. Well,
I know that. McGraw-Hill has done a good job of responding, and we appreciate that since it was all voluntary. And they changed quite a bit on jihad in their, which book was it? It looks like World History book. And I didn't know if you had any, they commented on, I think it was posted on the 17th. So
like yesterday?
If you'll take a look at and see, if
good.
That's been improved. They've changed quite a bit, so just take a look at it.
And I'm hopeful they did.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I'm getting calls from people from the publishing company saying they want to change, that's a great thing. And I appreciate that, and we're happy to do that. Our group could only respond with what was provided to us, and we got all of our deadlines in on time as prescribed by this board on the 31st of October.
Okay, Mr. Mercer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Colonel, the same questions. What group or groups do you represent?
I'm the chairman of a group called Truth in Texas Textbook.
So you're the Triple T.
Yeah, Triple T Coalition.
How much are you compensated being chairman of that?
My wife would tell you nothing, and I would tell you the same. But really, there's a lot of compensation and working with some great folks and publishers too that are helping out, trying to get our textbooks correct. And we appreciate and the board for all your work. So, no, I'm not being compensated. As a matter of fact, I'm probably we've been doing this for a year. I would estimate that probably income I've lost out of it is probably anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000, and that's just. And I don't say that as a martyr. I'm just telling you, if somebody wants to compensate me, then come and talk to me afterwards. But otherwise, I'm not. The hourly rate's not working out so well, but that's okay.
If you go to McDonald's and give them $1.50 and mention my name, they'll give you coffee. How's that? Let me ask you. I wasn't going to ask this, but there's something that we don't know about your. Is something else that drives you? You just involved in this in textbook, or anything in your military background that drives you? I don't know.
Well, I was a little over a year ago. I was doing my other profession, which was completely different than this, and I was not involved in this. But once I started reading some of the textbooks, I began to really see a problem. And as I read more and more, and my area of expertise was Islam and Christianity, but I thought we need to do something. And some people asked me to step up and organize this team. We've had over 100 volunteers from around the state and some outside the state who have asked us, and we put them all together. We trained them. We brought in experts. And that motivation was a job undone. Nobody had been doing it. And I think the product we've tried to put out to you, we hope it's been useful and beneficial to the publishers. And at the end of the day, we will distribute that out to the school boards because at the end of it, it's the people there at the local school boards who really need to have some sort of crutch or tool. They can't read. We reviewed 36 books, of which 32 are posted online.
Is it the 8th grade world history? Is it the middle school world history or high school world history?
We did high school and middle school world geography, cultures, U.S. history, U.S. government. We did one economic book and what? Yeah, U.S. history, U.S. government. So we didn't cover every publisher who was in those areas because our team was stretched kind of thin. We put 4 persons on each book. They divided up the book, and we did all this online. We collectively put all the data together on an electronic base camp because for most of us, the first time we met was today. We've never even met each other. Mm-hmm. It's all been online, talking to each other collaboratively with the process. So.
And I remember two last things. I remember that the session we had here, and whenever we had it here, October, I guess, that Monday. You mentioned the change was, it said by conquest, and it was added to conquest, missionary work, and trade. Is it overwhelmingly primarily conquest? Is there a percentage of conquest? It still says conquest first, missionary trade.
Exactly. There's really no comparison between the level of that occurred military conquest versus trade or missionary work. And again, missionary work being defined within the Islamic is that you have 2 options if you're non-Christian. You either convert or you die. The third option at that period of time was for Christians or Jews, convert, die, or you could practice your religion under a concept of demitude, which is interesting because one of the publishers I was just reading his review, his definition of demitude was of an issue of religious tolerance. Well, demitude was telling Jews and Christians that you could live and practice your religion as you wish, but you've got to pay a tax, a jizya tax, which is the same kind of tax that's being paid. And that definition in their mind was religious tolerance. Well, I've got friends that were in Iraq who had to leave their country because they couldn't pay the tax. And that's not exactly religious tolerance then or, during Muhammad's time.
And finally, the gentleman I met in October was a professor from A&M, I think the George Bush School. He's a Sharia lawyer.
He was trained. He was from Iran originally. Grew up there. Was a Muslim.
He's Muslim. Okay.
Expert, and had over 500 court cases in the Sharia court system. Converted to Christianity, and
ex-Muslim. He's ex-Muslim.
And so, but former Muslim. When they found out he was a Christian after 5 years of practicing, threw him into prison. But he has come back out, and as he spoke in our testimony, we included it with Dr. Andrew Boston. Here's a gentleman who's an author on a book on jihad and also teaches it at Texas A&M in that subject matter. And there's not a lot of folks that have that kind of pedigree to be able to talk like that, and yet we got a big bag of nothing, or at least no changes from the publishers, which we were disappointed.
Well, thank you for being here, sir. Thank you, Colonel.
Thank you for having me.
Mrs. Miller.
Colonel, I want to thank you for organizing and doing this on a volunteer basis. This is incredible. You're a great patriot. Thank you.
Well, let me just interrupt you real quick. I really did very little in terms. I've got 100 people that have over the last year and a half given up their lives, just like you and others. So if I didn't thank them right now publicly, I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. So, and I can't thank them enough. Now, some of them didn't completely tell the truth when they said had they been compensated. The best I could do is I gave them a jar of honey because I'm a beekeeper this morning. So that was as good as it gets. But thank you for thanking me. But really the thanks goes to all those volunteers that put this together.
Well, then multiply that
thank you.
Thanks and appreciation to going above and beyond, if you will.
Thank you.
I definitely feel that we need a response from these publishers and that you need them and we need them hopefully before Friday and that they will agree to these changes.
Well, we are getting, you mentioned Halton Mifflin. I got an email to that effect. I'm looking at that. I got a report last night from Worldview, which I guess they had submitted their report by the deadline that was provided by the TEA, but for some reason, I only just received it last night. We went through 111 pages of that, and that was, we couldn't respond to that or even post it, because up on our website, we post not only what our comments are, but what the others, the publishers have said. So we want to take their input, because this isn't over today from our standpoint. We want to continue that process, and we hope you'll give us the leeway and the latitude and the publishers to be able to continue to work that way. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
There are a lot of them in the audience. So I do need to correct myself. The definition of jihad was changed by Pearson, 6th grade. Ms. Hardy, I'd mentioned that to you. And so that's part of their response on the link. So
they changed it to trade.
No. Let's see. From the word jihad in Arabic means struggle. For many Muslims, it refers to the struggle to be a better person. For other Muslims, it refers to a struggle or violent holy war to defend or spread Islam. Muslim extremist groups in the region see European and American influence as a threat. They support the use of violence to attack Westerners or Muslims with different approaches to Islam. Those calling for violence include Al-Qaeda, an Islamic terrorist group, and that's for 6th grade.
And that's good. And Dr. Amy Jo Baker will be talking about that topic specifically with coming up behind. But again, I want to thank the publishers who have listened to us, because we were nothing beforehand. Nobody knew who we were. They've taken the time to pay attention to us, thanks to you, and because their desire, just like ours, is to give the best books to the children.
Yeah. Mr. Ratliff. And Ms. Bahorich, was that your hand?
Thank you for being here, and thank you all for all your work. I want to talk process for just a second.
Absolutely.
There was a deadline of September 5th for public comments to be submitted, and y'all submitted your report at the end of October.
On the second deadline that was approved when I sat in here earlier, October 31st was also a deadline that was given. If you'll look at the minutes from the meeting, Mr. Ratliff, I believe you'll be able to see that.
I don't think that, Monica, for staff, y'all want to clarify?
Yeah, I don't think there was a deadline for comments. The additional deadlines that we had, as we understand it, were for publisher responses.
We were given information that we could submit ours on October the 1st by representatives from the State Board of Education.
Well, you can submit even up till Friday morning. It's what the publishers are legally required.
It's a good question. We would have loved to be able to post it, but I'm in the business that if you push off the gate an hour late, you're going to get there an hour late. 7 weeks after the opening of the textbooks were supposed to be available, they were supposed to be available. They were the original links and everything based upon the timeline on April the 18th, I believe. Those publications were supposed to be passed on to the TEA. On or about the 25th or 27th of April, they were supposed to be made open to the public. It was not until mid-June, just prior to the formal review panels beginning, did we get access to those textbooks. So we had a 7-week delay in the process, and I brought this to the attention of several folks, and at the end of the day, it was lived within. So we could either have submitted an incomplete report done fewer books, but our tasking was to do as many books as we could within the period of time we originally had. And I had spent so much time training folks, I didn't want to stand them down. Could we have submitted some of those other books back into September and helped some? We didn't want to give some publishers a head start or an advantage that we didn't give to the other publishers. And we did, as we worked yeoman's work to have it ready on the 31st. And once again, in the process, I was told many of the publishers didn't get our comments until well into the next week. That was on a Friday. We submitted on a Friday and then also on a Sunday. By Monday, the publishers, I would have thought, again, it's not my process, I would have thought they could have easily been sent those. Many of them didn't receive those responses until the 5th or 6th, as well as the reviews I mentioned earlier, Mr. Ratcliffe, that from Worldview, they said they had submitted those by the November 5th deadline. And yet we had never seen them, and as of about 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, to the best of my knowledge, at least not on the brand new website that was there, which just changed, as a matter of fact, within the last couple of weeks in the middle of our review process, but that's a sidebar. But that 112-page report wasn't on the TEA website. So it wasn't, but the courtesy and thankful to the president sent me a copy of the review. So we worked very hard. We would have loved to have had the process work a lot smoother, but, you know, people in TEA are doing the best they can. You know, gotta love them. You know, they've got to deal with you. They got to deal with us, maybe more us. But I agree with you, and I hope there is a review and a discussion at the end of all this, kind of a debrief, sit down and scrub the system and say, what can we do? And the other amazing thing is you've got, I don't know how many ESCs are there here in the state? 21?
20.
Yeah, how many ever? Well, we had to get some of the books from the ESCs. We couldn't even get them from the website. We got them there. Why there's a jobs program for 21 ESC IT guys when you've got one TEA website, should put that up and put them all there. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I'll say about that is we were told by a couple of publishers, oh, you reviewed the wrong textbook. I said, well, wait a minute. We're not hackers. You know, we took the links and the passwords someone gave us. We didn't make them up. And then they tell us, oh, by the way, sorry, you reviewed the wrong book. Next. Well, that's a problem. So, and I'll be happy to sit with your staff and give them some feedback, give you some feedback, and I appreciate you asking the question. Because we don't like being late. But if you start late, you're going to get it late. But we did, that's why we get the October 31st that I was told that we could get that in by. So we did, and but we apologize for the crimp that it put into you, because I know your head's exploding with reading, and it's not any easier when it comes to that little time.
Well, my concern is in the middle of September, you provided a sneak preview to some blogs of your report.
Well, we provided it actually to I believe several board members just to get their kind of feedback. We didn't have a website up at that point in time because we were still scrambling trying to get it all up. So we shared it with some folks, absolutely. And we also presented it at the September public meeting. We submitted I think we submitted errors at that point in time, and some of those errors were addressed, thankfully, and that's great.
But my concern is when we have a process that we have to approve these books Friday.
You don't have to.
Well, we either approve them or reject them by Friday.
You could delay it. You could do whatever you want.
No, we can't delay it.
Okay. I'm unaware of the legal restrictions to prevent that from happening, but maybe.
Vaughn, the section of the Education Code that calls out December 1st as our deadline?
Okay, give them a second to flip through. Okay, Ms. Hardy.
I was just wondering, of the responses that you sent out on October 31st that were received by the publishers by November the 5th, how many have you heard back from in regard to those?
We had 1,507 errors that we had identified. We had 8.8% replies to those 1,507. So about 137 errors were replied to. About 75 corrections were made, so we were very happy. So it troubled me that I was not getting it, and that's kind of what I'm thinking. I mean, these guys, they're smart. They're going to want to reply, and I kept waiting and kept waiting. And then I hear about Houghton Mifflin today. And again, I don't know when they got our report.
Are you counting Houghton Mifflin in that?
No, stuff. I had to sleep last night, so I didn't really look at a lot of that data. I looked at some cursory things, and I was very pleased with some of the responses. So, and I haven't looked at Houghton Mifflin because it came in just this morning while we were here.
So more of it has probably been in than.
And we will review it and get it all up to speed. And I don't want to, mess up your deadline. We'll give you our feedback if anybody's interested. But again, our goal is to get the information out to the school districts, because we'll rate the books based upon what we find, either good, poor, or worse. So a publisher will either have good label next to their book, poor, or worse. And that way the local school district can have at least some sort of idea without having to do what we did to evaluate the book. And from there, then they can really affect the buying power. But we're thankful the publishers will listen as much as they have, and hopefully they'll listen even more, not just to us, but to anybody. I mean, we're all citizens. So anyone who stood up here today, I thank and praise all of them, no matter which side of the coin you live on. So I'm very impressed, and I was told that this has been the most public and most engaged process that anybody has ever seen. So, and I attribute that to your leadership, all of you, in engaging your residents to do that. That only helps the process. So I applaud each and every one of you for doing that. You should feel very good about that, even though it's made your head explode. Sorry.
We have been doing the best we can. I think Mr. Byer has an answer to Ms. Ratliff, and then Ms. Perez. And Ms. Bahorich, didn't you have your hand up? Okay, and then you.
Yeah. So under Education Code 31024, the board is required to provide a list of adopted instructional materials to each school district by December 1st of the year preceding the school year for which the instructional materials will be purchased.
Would that be the one list that was all voted on by the Texas Education Commissioner, or would that have to be the list that's out of here?
That's what we vote on Friday.
Yeah.
Right.
We're voting on the commissioner's list. We vote on that list.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you got a tough job.
So that's my concern with the reason why we have these triggers in place is to not have a 450-page report show up 8 working days before we show up in Austin, because if the more decisions we make in this circle without having the benefit of thought and analysis and meeting with people, we're going to make more mistakes if we make decisions in this circle.
And if you don't get the data because we give you an incomplete report, you'll also make mistakes. So,
but an incomplete report is better than a report that shows up without sufficient time to read it.
I would disagree that 8 days is not sufficient time, but that's tomato.
Given the salary of 0, we do all have jobs and families, so 8 working days with no staff is...
Welcome to the club.
You couldn't do it in 8 days.
It
took y'all months, so it takes time to do this correctly.
And I appreciate the dilemma you're in, and God bless you for signing up for it. So, but thank you.
Okay, Ms. Perez and then Ms. Bahorich.
Thank you, Mr. Ratliff. He voiced the same concern that I had, so I won't reiterate, but I do have a question. Several times, Colonel White, you mentioned that your area of expertise was Islam and Christianity. How is that? How are you an expert in those? Are you studied in religious studies? Are you degreed in religious studies?
About the last 5 years, I've self-studied. The last 5 years, I've probably collected probably 40 to 50 books, having read that many on Islam, traveled around the country, listening and learning, just like a lot of self-taught experts in the field. So for me, it is that degree of expertise that I feel comfortable. I'm not going to teach a college course. I'm not going to go out and advertise myself as, hey, I'm going to give you college credit, like Daniel Akbari or Dr. Boston.
Right. So are you not published, or have you not done work that's been reviewed by peers?
Yeah, I am published. For the last year, this is what we want to be judged on. It's not who I am to move the to discussion about me, because it really doesn't matter who I am. It's judge us on our work. And I think based upon what we presented are the facts, if those facts, not happy with those, that doesn't mean it's not true. But for me personally, I use the analogy, you're not a doctor, or are you a doctor? I assume you're not. But if you had a cut on your finger, you would go out and put a Band-Aid in. You wouldn't call a doctor to do that. From a standpoint of Islam, you read the fundamental documents, you read, you learn, and for 4 or 5 years, that's all I've done other than in my day job. So that's why I feel like I'm at least smarter than the average person on it, and I'm happy to comment on it, and I've done that. And if I've been in error, then happy to point that out.
Thank you, and I can appreciate that. But if we're talking about teaching over 5 million students in Texas, I want to make sure that we have people who have been credentialed that are also looking at this work. And so, as a follow-up, I know that you mentioned that you were training the folks that kind of did this research. What does that training look like? Who was involved in that training, and how are they credentialed?
Yes, excellent question, and thank you for asking. Neil Fry, some of you may be very familiar with. I have a very close relationship with Neil. Neil was the first person I went to when I wanted to go and drove out to Longview, Texas, which is a long way out there. and spent 3 hours with Neil talking to him. We continue to have a relationship of talking about how he's gone about the process. We talked to Dr. Sandra Stotsky, who is one of the experts in the field of education. We used Dr. Sandra Alfonsi, who is for the last 20 or 30 years has been involved in this process. We used Dr. Ellen Wald, who is a PhD in education. We would bring our team together online or conference calls. We had conference calls about every 2 or 3 weeks that we would record that if you missed, you had to go back, and we scheduled those twice. So we would go back and do that training there. We had reading materials from Neil's work, William Bonetta, which may not ring a bell to many of you, but if you do a Google search, William Bonetta textbook review in the 80s and 90s and mid-2000s, he was doing textbook review out in California for years, and I have a personal relationship. Matter of fact, he wrote a long missive on one of the proposals or one of the critiques done by the TFN.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I know that we have quite a few people.
But then back to your, and we also, after we did all that training, we then did a mock review. We put all those volunteers through, and we mock reviewed the current social studies textbooks, and that took 6 weeks. So and after they were doing their reviews, we then had reviewers who were experts, like the speaker who's going to come up behind me, who were experts in that field that then reviewed those comments. So,
and that was going to be my next question. I was trying to look up some of these individuals that you named,
right.
Neil Fry, and please correct me, but it looks like he's a business professional.
Negative Tower. No,
okay.
he is.
What is his?
Neil Fry is a director for Education Research Associates, I believe.
Sounds right.
Yeah, ERA. He is out of Longview, Texas. If you Google up Gabler, Neil Fry, I think it's Education Research Analyst.
Analyst.
Yeah, Analyst. That's it.
That's it.
So yes, he's in that area. Dr. Andrew Boston, who's an expert in that area. We also use Dr. David Patterson, who's out of UT Texas, who has a doctorate degree in Holocaust studies and other Jewish studies.
And so any of the individuals that, and I'm speaking particularly to your testimony today,
right.
Were any of these professionals credentialed in Islamic studies, Muslim studies?
Daniel Akbar is a Sharia-trained lawyer. Dr. Stephen Boston is author on the topic of Islam, has several books out on that, and also not mentioned, but Reverend Joe Carey is a graduate of Biola University and also has a degree specifically in Islamic studies and witnessing to Muslims and has that degree. So yes, we went out and found experts, at least in my own experience, but across the board, it wasn't just Islam. Or Christianity we looked at. We brought in experts from various areas. We used Sons of American Revolution for some of our expertise. The Texas Navy, we worked with them and made sure some of the information that came out and they did a great job, by the way, and I'm a Texas Navy Admiral. So I was very proud of the organization for doing that. So we tried to team up with some groups to get the best product out there, and so we wouldn't be just looking at it from there was no book that was a single review bias. There were at least 3 eyes and sometimes 4 eyes on the book, and they had to come together with a report at the end of it. And we threw out about 10 or 15% of the comments that people made because trading one person's bias for another doesn't really work.
Hey, Ms. President, you have another question?
Just 2 more. And I guess just out of curiosity, and you can do a quick synopsis, but what does that training look like?
The training, like I said, was 3 months of going through the read files that we provided for people. We brought in, like I said, the experts that we did conference calls in. We also did the mock review, which was a very painstaking process of looking at the textbooks. So that was the total training process was probably about 5 months. Not obviously because these people had jobs too, but they would come in and take the time, off time, come in and do this process. And it wasn't a process that had ever been done before. We went to the experts and said, if you were doing this from scratch, what would you do to make this the best process? Because, as you know, the 300 people who were brought in here to do the formal Texas review panels, all they could do is go through and mark off the teaks and say, they're there, they're there. Well, you had some of the brightest minds here, and they couldn't do what we were doing, and that was looking at factual errors as well as omission of facts, which is a subcategory of factual errors, imbalances. We all looked at the teachers' additions because some of the teachers' additions had very leading question, agenda building kind of questions that caused us concern, and we highlighted those in our report also.
Okay. I think she has one more question
Sorry,
for you.
Marissa, I hope I probably ran on too long.
That's okay. I'll go ahead and pass on the last question.
Okay. All right, Ms. Bahorich, and then Ms. Knight, then Mr. Rowley, then Mr. Mercer.
Jeez, you guys are...
I think what's a little unusual and probably what maybe is kind of difficult about this conversation is that not only was Muhammad a spiritual leader, he was also a military leader. And so it makes it a little difficult to kind of talk about, the spread of the new religion. And it seems like if I'm understanding this correctly, you're saying that when you're talking about especially the first 100 years of Islam, that is, it's clear, you're saying from the history, that it was more about conquering territories than it was about a missionary zeal to, go out and, preach the gospel kind of thing. Is that, I'm trying to understand, because I don't know enough about the background.
I would correct a couple things that you said. First of all, Muhammad is a political figure, a military figure. It is a way of life, much like communism is, much like fascism is. And I'm not saying they're equal or whatever. I'm just saying it's an ideology. So we're not talking about a person per se. We're talking about a belief system that encompasses every part of your life. So based upon that, it wasn't just the first 100 years, because, again, they had over 500 battles over the next 1,400 years, all involving the spreading of Islam. And looking up into the Crusades periods, one of the things we looked at, the common misconception from a Crusade standpoint is, suddenly the Christians decided to up one day and just go down and try to take back Jerusalem. Well, most people forget the fact that for over 400 years, Christians and Jews lived there in Jerusalem, and they were allowed to worship. Even after Muhammad was there, there was some limited travel, but they weren't welcome. Well, in 1099, they decided to change those rules, and suddenly the Pope decided we can't have any more Christians or Jews go down, witness, at least worship there. So we've got to do something to take back. So that was a reaction to 400 years of oppression by the Muslim community. And again, we don't tell that story that way. We tell the story that it's the bad Christians. And I'm not saying they weren't all Boy Scouts, but certainly it didn't start that way because they just woke up one day and said, let's march down to Jerusalem. So it is an all-encompassing aspect. So it does not just the first 100 years. I mean,
okay, Ms. Bahorich, did you have another question?
Well, I was just, so what was your group's analyzation of the coverage of the Crusades? That's a good example, because obviously, Christians are not very proud of the behavior when the troops there when the Crusaders went into Jerusalem and the slaughter that took place of Jews and.
Let me just make this point. If Christians got up in arms and said, let's go into northern Iraq and try to defend the Christians and Jews there, what would be our response? Well, first of all, you'd probably say, are you crazy? Have you not read the news? Well, second of all, and some have done that. There have been some that is in essence a response from the Pope's call out to say, come and save Jerusalem, come and save, your homeland. And Jews and Christians, and obviously all of them weren't religious, but at the end of the day, that call out is not told in that vein. And I'm not an expert down to the nuts and bolts of all that, but having read enough of the Crusades and the bias and how it's toned in flavor, it's as if suddenly the Islamic community had been down there all these years and suddenly somebody was wanting to just come in and invade them. They were trying to reestablish their homeland, and that's a reasonable expectation for people who had been nearly eliminated from that part of the world.
Okay, done? Okay. Mrs. Knight, then Mr. Rowley, then Mr. Mercer.
Madam Chairman, the first question.
You need a mic. There we go.
And first of all,
I want to walk in front of the speakers.
Okay.
My first question is to you, Madam Chairman, and then I want to ask the Colonel a question. At what point will the staff be able to respond to some of the assertions about the lateness of material and when
we actually
the
discussed
emails went
that today, and they will start their discussion after the testifiers.
Okay.
They wanted the testifiers to go first, and I agree with that. So.
Okay, and then my question
Yes, ma'am.
For you is, could you clarify for me what you meant about once this vote is taken, you want to continue to work with the publishers, if I heard you correctly?
Well, we know publishers sell textbooks in many other states, and we've had contacts from 8 other states who have said they want to duplicate the process and the protocols that we've put into place. And the more of these books that we can review and continue to do it professionally and get people engaged at the local level, we want those states to begin to deposit those reviews on our website, so you don't have to do a Google search for Halton Mifflin 8th grade book. And more importantly, you've got a tool to be able to look at that, because they just repackage the books in some ways, and we want those states to not have to go through what we did. We want them to learn from us and let the textbook publishers know there's a symbiotic relationship between the buyers and the sellers. And no offense to you guys, but you're not the buyers. It's really the parents. It's the people at the local school. So we want to give them some power, an opportunity to give them a product and encourage them to do what we've been doing. And so far, 8 states have indicated we'd love to do that. So I think that's encouraging, and the fact that Texas is leading the way, thanks to what y'all have allowed us to do, we appreciate that.
Okay. And as a follow-up question to his response, I'd like to ask, I guess Vaughn may be the person who would answer the question, and then I'll explain to you what my concern is. Once we take this vote today and then finalize it on Friday, what are we actually approving if individuals can go after we have made our vote and discuss with the publishers and make changes? What are we agreeing to if additional changes can be made if someone is not monitoring whether that is a factual error versus an omission? Is that question clear to you?
Roy, you didn't mean Texas. You meant
No, I meant beyond
after,
Texas. But
okay.
I agree with your question. I think it's a great question. On Friday, I'll ask you this. On Friday, are the textbook publishers who are here, if they haven't given you something in writing, what is their obligation after Friday and you vote for it? Can they walk out of here and say, well, whatever's in the books is done? And I would be curious, as a public, person and paying taxes, I would be interested to say, what are you on the 21st?
Okay.
Can they make any other changes, or what?
Ms. Martinez will answer that.
Good. Thank you.
So there's an important distinction between the factual errors and public comment. We will have a handout for you when we get to the discussion of this item that will provide you with a timeline. And in your proclamation, you made a distinction between alleged factual errors and public comment. We will also provide you with the report of factual errors that you will vote on and that we will then verify have been made, and we will work with the publishers to verify those. Responses to public comment, however, is not something that this process includes, that we would go through and verify whether changes were made or were not made if they were in response to public comment. So there's that important distinction between the factual errors and additional comment, and much of, as we understand it, much of what has been submitted after the September 5th deadline in your proclamation is public comment.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Anybody else?
Mrs. Knight was that okay. Mr. Rowley.
Colonel White, I want to say thank you for all the effort that you and your group went through. I am a big proponent of the of all stakeholders being involved in this process.
Thank you.
And your group and the effort that you put forth represents what I consider to be something of a grassroots effort with regard to those folks that are interested, taking time out from their jobs and occupations to invest in this textbook process. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks for your service too.
Well, certainly. But I'm, and maybe we'll hear more about this when staff has their opportunity to come up and explain to us about the deadlines. But I'm in a bit of dilemma, and I have been for a while, actually for about 8 days, when I received, I think it was 469 pages or something like that of the comments from your group. And I didn't, I'll confess, I didn't read them all, but I looked through it and tried to get a sense of what it was, and what I saw was the process being utilized appropriately and being done as it should. As we sit here today, and maybe Ms. Martinez's explanation answers my question, but as we sit here today, I don't know how, as a board member, I can make an informed decision about whether or not publishers are going to respond to the comments that your group has put forth, particularly in light of the fact that we're probably going to vote in about 30 minutes or an hour or so, or sometime in here. So I don't know. There's probably not a question in there somewhere. It's just more of an observation that says, I certainly appreciate your effort. I wish that you could have got the materials sooner, so that we could have got your comments sooner, so that all of that would have been much more meaningful for us. But as we stand here today, I'm thinking, I hope the publishers will continue in the responsive mode that we've seen out of them during the course of this process, because we have seen that they will continue to do so and take your comments into consideration. And to make that into question, do you agree?
Is this Jeopardy or something? I got to have to answer it in the form of. I would agree 100%. If someone, and again, they don't owe us anything, and they have been very gracious to even contact us. We're happy. We just want to know who do we send it to, and work. And if we work directly with the publishers, it's someone on your staff. I'll leave it up to you. But your process is your process, and I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. The wheel's already made.
You probably send it to the SBOE support email.
Done.
I mean, that's just a thought, unless someone has a better idea. So, all right. So, Mr. Mercer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just two questions. First of all, again, your group was all volunteer, no compensation.
Correct. Unless somebody's taking money from one of you guys, and I don't think
was your group the one that said that we put Moses as a founding father?
I'm sorry?
Was your group the one that said that we put Moses as a founding father?
That was not our group. We didn't.
Let me. Well, then I'm.
Well, I think there was another group that did that, and my understanding is that most of them were all paid. But that's okay.
That's exactly what I'm leading to. You're not. I invite the media to go back to those quotes. Those people apparently didn't show up today who made those quotes. I would like to ask them who they represent and were they compensated to make those kind of comments, which is made, again, this morning I stopped, feeding my dog, and there's national CBS News talking the same thing. So I would invite the media to go back to wherever you got those quotes from and ask them who they represented and were they compensated for that kind of stuff. And lastly, thank you for being here, Madam Chairman. Will the publishers have a chance today or Wednesday, Thursday to come back and respond, comment? I'm just wondering.
Yeah. I think that in the past, sometimes that has been done, and I think it would be at the discretion of the board during our discussion after testimony.
Well, I asked because I hate to be voting no or abstaining, but I have some questions that I would feel a lot more comfort if the publishers would respond to that on the record and give me some, Mr. Raleigh, some warm fuzzies, whatever, on behalf of District 5, by the way. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Ratliff. Mr. Maynard, did you have your hand up?
I did.
Mr. Ratliff has already spoken once, so why don't you go ahead?
Teacher's pet.
Got a lot of pets today.
Wait, I finally found my ticket.
And well-deserved, I will add. Colonel White, I just thank you for your efforts. And, one of the things that when we talk about public schools,
right,
who is the public? Well, that's us. And I think that it's imperative. I think that all of us have certainly had some concerns about the people just not being engaged, not paying attention.
Amen, brother.
And sometimes it leaves all of us just scratching our head like, are people not engaged?
Yeah.
There's nothing more important. That said, I will tell you that one of the things that this board has really sought to do is to try to have a process that is completely transparent, that facilitates as much public engagement as possible. I guess my question to you is that and that maybe that having this type of grassroots effort is a new norm. That'd be great.
It would be.
We would welcome that. But I guess my question to you, and maybe it's something you'd have to think about, is that do the timelines in our process facilitate that and allow that to happen fully?
And I think Mr. Ratliff is shaking, and I would tend to agree with you. I think, and I'd be happy to be a part of a steering committee or come back as someone who saw it from the other side, is say, hey guys, I think there's a better mousetrap that can be built here, and work with the staff, because I know they don't have enough of them, and decide what duties are where, and also how to better utilize. Like I said before, there's 21 ESCs out there who are trying to post the same information, and why is there a duplication of effort in this day and age of technology? Why 21 little IT guys in 21 different cities are trying to put up the information? And so yes, the timelines, I think Texas has a better system, having talked to a lot of other places. I'm glad I live here, and I'm glad that we have the process, but we didn't help, but we also kind of got out of the, they didn't start the gun until about 7 weeks after when we thought it was going to start. So we apologize for that. If there was something we could have done to do better, but I'm happy to be a part of solving it and not just saying about it and then walking away. That's why we did the textbooks thing. I got involved because I wanted to do something.
And just as a follow-up to that is that we're working under conditions today where a publisher going through the process, they're not required to go through the process.
That's another whole topic, yeah.
Right. But that's a fact.
Oh, absolutely.
And the thing about it is that our publishers don't want to feel like that they're being ambushed at the end, and if we make the process too onerous or are full of booby traps and things like that, they opt out and they go directly to the district. We don't want that to happen. I don't think anybody wants that to happen. Yeah. So we would certainly welcome your comments in terms of how do we make the process better for everybody involved,
and for the publishers too, because they want.
Exactly.
I know they want to sell books. I'm all for capitalism. You're not going to sell books if you're making people upset. So we need to help them, help you, and help our kids. So I'm happy to be a part of that, and as well as any of my team members, because they certainly have opinions too. And thank you all, and I appreciate that opportunity.
And Roy, in the spirit of correct, factual error, no factual errors, there are 20 service centers.
Thank you. I couldn't remember. I'm in San Antonio. I couldn't remember if that was 21 or 20 or.
You were close.
But anyway. But thank you. I'm happy to stand corrected.
Mr. Ratliff is next, and then Mrs. Knight.
Just a question for staff, just so everybody, I think many of us are learning the process as we go, just because it's new to some of us. So the publishers are required to respond to comments submitted by September 5th.
The publishers were required, to respond. So there was a deadline for Texas residents to file lists of alleged factual errors by 5 p.m. on September 5th. A deadline for Texas residents to file official written comments concerning instructional materials submitted for adoption by 5 p.m. on September 5th. And then on September 30th was the deadline for publishers and any others who participated in a hearing before the SBOE to file responses to official written comments from Texas residents and to testimony presented at the public hearing.
So
I stand corrected. Thank you.
No, I'm going to offer you some hope that all the changes aren't done yet, because if I understand it, and before I say that, Monica's looking at me going, "Where are you going with this?" If it's not a passage that has been credited to cover a specific TEAC, publishers can continue to make changes from now until the next adoption of social studies or math, as long as it's not a passage that has been pointed to say this covers TEK X. Publishers can add or delete content at their discretion.
So you have a section in your administrative rule related to updates. And publishers can update their materials. If they want to make an update that would affect text-bearing content, something that they got credit for meeting a student expectation, they have to have your permission to make that update.
For a text-based text.
For text-bearing content.
Okay.
If it is not text-bearing content, they do not have to have that permission.
Okay, so let's
So
pull it
those are
back
for
up.
updates of adopted materials.
Let's get a little closer to the windshield between now and when these books go live in EMAT, or before publishers press the print button. They can continue to make changes in response to anything they've gotten since September the 5th, as long as it's not things that they're getting credit for text-based coverage.
We think that's correct.
So the report y'all did, the report, if anybody, publishers don't want errors in their books because it hurts their credibility, it hurts their ability to sell books. Nobody wants errors, and they want to fix them now before they get fined for having them in the classroom. So my message is don't stop looking and working, and if you find something, publishers choose to respond and may and want to, but they may not always, just from a sheer volume.
I'll be happy to do that. Just don't tell my wife.
She thought this whole thing was over, and it may not be yet. But there are still changes being made because publishers want these things to be airtight
right, and we
before
do
they
too.
hit the classroom.
So, and thank you. That's a great clarification. That is the hope you talked about. I
And
appreciate
Miss Monica, Miss Martinez, what if I have a question real quick, and then Mrs. Knight has the floor. But what if I know that some of the things that Triple T on their reviews, they keep writing omission. And that's that pesky 50% that the legislature came up with. Well, let me ask my question real quick first. What if a publisher wants to add content that does affect a curriculum standard? You know what I'm saying? I mean, okay, if they want to add material that is currently omitted, let's say that they totally, well, I know one. I'll say for Mr. Mercer, let's say that they skipped Philip Bazaar, and they decide, and he's in our TEKS, and they decide they want to add Philip Bazaar. Do they have to? How does that work?
Is it a such as or including?
If it's a such as,
there's a distinction.
It would be a such as because all the includings are there.
If it's a such as, then that's not something that your state review panels were looking for to give them credit.
Example.
If it's an including, then they would have to have your permission.
Okay, what if it was a certain battle in a war that is in the TEKS, but that they omitted? Because they only have to cover 50%, and it's not an including, it's not a such a, just a...
And I'm looking over at Vaughn, but I think that they have to have your permission to make any updates to text-bearing content.
Even if it doesn't exist now, and they want to add it to their book, right? Okay. I think I have it. Maybe. Mrs. Knight. And yeah. You turn your mic on. Yeah.
I mean,
that's what I was kind of wondering.
Question is constitutional. So
I think we're hearing yes, they can.
That they
I think
can.
That's what we heard. Well, they're talking. Let's let them talk a second.
So I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Your rule says publishers may at any time make changes that do not affect Texas essential knowledge and skills coverage.
Okay. So if they...
But that would affect it.
It would affect it.
It would affect coverage.
It would improve it.
Yeah. Okay. Clear as mud. All right, Mrs. Knight. Okay, but you need that mic.
Okay, excuse me, Colonel. I'm going to walk in front of you and go to my seat.
Okay,
you go right ahead, young lady. You've earned it, and congratulations on a great tenure. I understand this is your last meeting.
I know. We're going to miss her.
Well,
Mr. Maynard, did you have a question while she's moving to her seat?
I just had, and I just to be clear, So, as it relates to the revisions or updates that are not in passages related to TEKS or TEX, but if things that are possibly factual errors, it doesn't matter if they apply to the TEKS or not. Is that correct?
Again, there's that distinction between factual errors and public comment. So factual errors, you do have the authority to fine a publisher if an error is identified even after the instructional materials are in the classroom.
But it doesn't matter where that factual error is, whether it's related
right
to the TEKS or anywhere.
But if we identify it as a public, they don't get fined? As a public comment? But you guys find it?
This board, no. It's not about who finds it.
Okay.
It's about whether or not it is a verified factual error.
Well, I will comment because a lot of our replies, the 1,507 that I looked at, oftentimes factual error, publishers just chose not to put it in there. And I'm not saying we're 100% correct, we weren't. But they would say, request for additional content denied. It's not a factual error.
Yeah.
So if I'm the home team, the Rangers, and I get to call balls and strikes, and I get to call out who's out and who's safe at first base, that's a bit of I'm going to win a lot of games that way. So I just throw that out there because that's the dilemma you've put yourself in to have that. But I don't know of a better way, and I'm not here to find a cure for cancer either. So
the legislature cut it down to 50%. Yeah.
Madam Chair, and let me just clarify one thing. Now, does that provision, as far as a fine, does it only apply to materials approved by the state board, or does it apply for anything that might be in a classroom, even
materials approved by the state board?
It's just the materials that you adopt.
Okay, very good.
Okay, Mr. Allen and then Ms. Hardy.
Colonel White, I wanted to also thank you and the Texas Hope, the Texas Textbook Coalition.
Thank you, sir.
Because it is gratifying to see the citizens involved in this process in such a passionate way. I think you finally defined it for me, but you would realize, I hope you would realize that there are others out there who might disagree with some of the, I guess, identifiable comments or expansions that you have. And therefore, for us, and I think I wanted to make it real clear, we have a scope that we need to look through that determines how we are going to vote.
Right.
And I don't want you to go away thinking that you've not been heard today, and that's a very narrow scope for us. And I think the last comment you made is that a lot of the things that you brought forward might be things that would bring more clarity, would help the students identify things better, but that's not within our privy. That's just simply not within our privy to determine whether our vote is up or down based on those kinds of things. And I just wanted you to really know that.
And our final grade won't be based upon what you vote up or down either.
So I wanted to encourage you to continue to do exactly what you said you were going to do later, and that's to continue to inform other boards and other members in the state of Texas so that they can be aware of the work that you've done and what they can use to determine whether they want to use these textbooks or not. But our vote has to be through the mirror that's been provided us and what the agency is going to show us what we can vote up and down on.
I understand completely, but we're encouraged by all of you for what you've done, allow us to come here. We hope that would occur in other places and other local and states. So.
Okay.
Anyway.
Ms. Hardy.
I just want to make the simple fact, if you included constitutional republic, that is in fact a factual error. The fact that they called us a democracy, that is an error.
But the publishers quite often have responded, that's not a factual error.
But it is if they have their facts correct.
There you go.
We went through this big time already.
Oh, well. Well, I'm hopefully that was resonated with everybody sitting here.
So I asked Mr. Beyer if publishers want to bring in new content or other content that affects a TEKS after this Friday, and so I wanted him to clarify that because I think I was still confused.
Yeah, so your provision on updates allows a publisher to submit a request to the Commissioner of Education to submit approvals to update it, and it requires that the adopted materials covering the TEKS be approved by the board. So
there is a pathway.
Right.
I'll be ready to walk short of
Okay.
dancing
After
with the
Friday,
stars.
there is a protocol, a procedure. Sure. Okay. Mrs. Knight, have you made it back to your seat? Okay.
Okay. I want a clarification. When you say that after Friday, it is the board's responsibility, so is that brought back to the board for approval? How does that work, Vaughn? I'm not sure that I'm clear.
Well, so presumably if they're making changes to the TEKS in the textbooks, that would then be brought to the board at their next meeting to approve or deny.
After the last meeting.
Right. This would be updating the edition. This would be updating a book that has been adopted.
Okay, but that update comes back to the board after the vote is taken on Friday.
Well, I think what you all are. I mean, I think we're talking about several things and getting things somewhat confused. So what you're doing now is you're looking at textbooks. You're going to make a vote on whether or not to adopt a textbook. Mm-hmm. You're also going to look at whether or not to approve a publisher changing the text that they submitted. So while you're making those decisions similar in time, they are two different decisions.
Okay, but I'm still not clear.
Okay. Monica, can you?
I can try.
Okay, yeah.
So if at some point after you adopt a book, the publisher says, we'd like to make some additional updates. We'd like to make some changes. What has happened in the past, and it's typically happened probably sometime after the adoption, a publisher might come to us and say, we'd really like to make this update to our instructional material. We look to see whether the update that they're making is to content that would affect the essential knowledge and skills that they got credit for in order for them to be adopted. If it's not related to the essential knowledge and skills, then they don't need your permission to make that change. Right. If we determine that it is related to, for example, citations that they got credit for, then we would have to add an item to your agenda and bring that back so that the board could vote on whether or not to approve that update.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Now, my question for you, Colonel, and let me remember my manners and thank you for your congratulations.
Sure, you bet.
From your perspective, in the search for factual errors, does it make a difference whether it is a volunteer group that does it or someone who has been paid to go through the textbook and come up with factual errors?
Do I think there's a difference?
Yes.
Judging by the product. I mean, at the end of the day, like I was responding to Marissa, doesn't really matter. Look at the end product. And so I think that's important. But you or anyone else, it doesn't make you noble to get money. It doesn't make you ignoble not to get money. But I would say at the same time, it may be a factor, particularly if someone is paying you to write a report in a certain way and that's your employer. The reality is if you come back writing in a different way than your employer wanted, that has no doubt a consequence. So that's not for me to judge. All I know is what we did. So you can make that own assessment.
Well, no, I think you and I are in agreement when we say it's the end product. And when you look at that end product, you should be able, from my perspective, be able to draw whether that is an objective end product or whether that is a biased end product. Okay, because I guess the point I wanted to clarify with staff is that we have nothing in our rules that says whenever we get these factual errors and public comment, it doesn't have to come from a paid organization versus a non-paid group. Is that right?
Right. The distinction is not where or who identified the error. It's whether or not it's a factual error.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
That's
All
it.
right. Any other question? You were worried about just having 2 minutes. You're still up here. Any other
Boy,
questions for
I could
Colonel
have
White?
gotten to bed at 1:30 instead of, anyway.
We really do appreciate
Thank
it. Thank you very much. Okay, members, we just have a couple more, and then we'll take a break. So, a few more.
Amy Jo Baker, followed by Jonathan Sines, and then Zachary Copeland.